Santa Claus Conquers the Martians is a lot like the son I never wanted. That is to say that despite its boundless potential, it does nothing but find new and inventive ways to disappoint me. And I think in truth, that is what is most disappointing about this film, its completely squandered potential. And to name this one particular element as the film's biggest letdown is actually saying a lot, because in actuality, as far as disappointment goes, this film is not exactly in short supply. Firstly though, let's address exactly what potential the film had, because without potential, it can't exactly squander it. And as I go to do so, I'm going to endeavour to use the word potential less, because I now feel like I've said it so many times that it's starting to lose meaning. So what possibly could this film have offered if it didn't turn out to be a terrible movie? Well, it's all really in the title, isn't it? Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. That contains three things that are all completely awesome. It has Santa Claus, awesome, conquering, awesome, and Martians, awesome. When I first read the title, I was kind of hoping for a Santa's sleigh kind of Santa laying an Alexander the Great style beatdown on Marvin the Martian. Instead, rather unfortunately, I got this.
Well, we've never disappointed the kids yet.
Despite the promises of the title, this film, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, actually has very little, if any, Santa Claus conquering Martians. The storyline, to very vaguely and quickly outline it so I can get to the point, is that the kids on Mars are acting weird, and that the reason that they're acting weird is because it's around Christmas time, and therefore the space wizard, who looks like the wizard from Monty Python, claims that the only way to make the kids from Mars not act weird is to get a Santa Claus for Mars for the Martian kids. So far, a completely reasonable and perfectly acceptable storyline for a great movie to be propped up on. The Martians then go to Earth to kidnap Santa Claus to bring Santa Claus back to give to the Martian children and therefore save the Martian children from acting weird because they will have a Santa Claus and thus the problem would be solved. And they do in fact, to a degree, succeed in this plan and manage to kidnap Santa Claus and bring him back to Mars. However, this is where the storyline starts to get a little bit confusing because they really fail to actually emphasize what they're doing at this point. I mean, the storyline is obviously utter garbage, and there are a lot of terrible problems between the start of the movie and here that I'll get to later, but once again we'll cycle back to that later. At the moment we're still talking about that P word. So a major issue, and perhaps the biggest issue with the film, is that Santa Claus does kind of conquer the Martians, but it's done so subtly and badly that you can hardly notice him doing it, and if you do in fact notice it, it's still not done interestingly. You see, what they seem to have been attempting to get across is that Santa Claus, through his good nature or jolly vibe or some kind of intangible Christmas spirit, manages to impress on the Martians the Christmas values of goodwill to all men on peace on earth and all that jazz, and in doing so, thereby conquers them. This is, at least I think, what the writers, if I am to use the word so loosely, were attempting to do when creating this movie. However, it really does fall flat for various reasons. Firstly, the ignorance of Santa. He does not even appear to realize that he's been kidnapped, even though he was taken from his home by gunpoint after all of his elves and his wife were immobilized by the Martians and left to stand there and presumably starve to death.
But Santa Claus, you will never return to Earth.
Oui.
Now you belong to Mars.
Ho, ho, ho.
I assume they made Santa so stupid because they were attempting to show him to have some sort of childlike innocence. However, considering he's a grown man, and also considering that in another situation where he really should know what's happening, but doesn't, and the children with him do, instead of it coming across as Santa being super trusting and embodying whimsical childhood ignorance, innocence, he instead just appears to be a bit of a moron. And because the writers opted to have Santa Claus having literally no idea about anything going on around him, when his aura or intangible Christmas spirit or whatever actually begins to change the Martians, it's very difficult for the audience to actually attribute this victory to Santa Claus because he doesn't actually do anything, it just happens because he's Santa. And the second issue of Santa conquering the Martians is the Martians themselves, who don't really actually undergo any significant change. Granted, they laugh like maniacs like Santa does, but aside from that, they have actually no character development. As far as I can tell, this issue exists because the writers don't actually understand how to write conflict. You see, even before Santa Claus and the Martians encounter each other, there's already a distinct good Martian and bad Martian within the group of Martians who are all supposed to be bad. By the end of the movie, the bad Martian has been defeated, granted, but he's still evil, And also, by the end of the movie, the good Martian is supposedly acting good and seems to have been conquered by Santa's good spirit, but despite this, the movie has already been painting him as a good guy by contrasting him with the bad Martian the entire movie, so he's still not really changed at all. And this continues to fall flat when you consider that this good Martian was actually the one who was responsible for kidnapping Santa, and even at the end of the movie only released Santa Claus because Mars actually ended up with a Santa of its own. So he's not actually undergone any moral journey, he's just gotten what he wants. So let's do a quick recap. Bad Martian still bad, supposedly good Martian who's actually responsible for the kidnapping of Santa Claus and 2 children, we'll get to that later, still actually evil, and in the end, entirely through only passive engagement, all Santa Claus has actually done is make them laugh like maniacs. Would I call that conquering? No, not really. And that's really what I mean by the film having squandered potential. If the Martians, and I mean all of the Martians, were portrayed throughout the entire film as bad, and then throughout the movie, Santa Claus, through strength of character or acts of kindness or some Christmassy thing, managed to make them see the error of their ways and thereby turn around the situation, this could have actually been a relatively decent Christmas film. Instead it didn't, wasn't, and so therefore sucked. However, quite unfortunately, this is not where the errors of the film end. The second major issue is Droppo. My god, is Droppo awful. Droppo is, I can only assume, supposed to have been the comic relief. However, he's not funny. He's basically this film's Jar Jar Binks, and nobody wants to be any film's Jar Jar Binks. Not unlike Santa Claus, Droppo is a complete and utter moron, which once again I think was supposed to be showing that he had childhood innocence. Throughout the entire film, he acts like an infuriating idiot and does things that no one with even a fraction of a functioning brain would, unless the character only existed to progress the plot when the writers had no idea what they were doing, which was basically the entire movie because these writers were clearly not very good at their jobs. And at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, he becomes the new Santa Claus, which of course he does because he's basically the exact same character as Santa Claus in the film. So he too, just like every single character in the movie, had absolutely no character progression. If this movie was anything even remotely close to competent, Droppo would not have existed as a character because he's pointless, and instead the baddest of the bad Martian could have undergone some character development when seeing the error of his ways and become Mars's Santa Claus, sort of like a Martian Grinch. Yet more squandered potential. But I suppose this could have never actually happened because it would have required the writers to have even a fraction of competence. Now, there are many more things I could complain about regarding this movie, but I've only got a short 10-minute segment in this overall holiday special, so I'll just quickly rattle off some and then do my final complaint. So, acting, garbage. Dialogue, garbage. Plot and story, utter garbage. Costumes, effects, and sets, well, to be completely honest, I really quite enjoyed those. And finally, excruciatingly poor childhood actors as the main characters, unforgivable garbage. I know I've complained about child actors several times before, for instance in Space Raiders, but considering it's Christmas time and Home Alone is one of the best Christmas movies out there which centers entirely around a child actor, and considering that children are kind of a big part of Christmas, I thought I would give this movie a pass and give it a shot despite the fact it's got child actors as its main characters. This was a mistake. Their already poor dialogue is of course delivered poorly because they're kids, and the only reason they appear in this film is to appeal to the younger generation, which is, I suppose at this point ironic, because the generation that would have grown up watching this movie are now old enough to truly despise the trope of sticking in children in a film just to make it appeal more to children. And that can literally be the only reason they were stuck in here, because their being in this film is actually a plot hole. You see, the Martians don't know where to find Santa Claus, and because they're idiots, they ask children for directions. After doing so, they realize that if they leave the children would be able to tell people that it was the Martians that took Santa Claus, and thereby Mars would be forced to face Earth's retribution, whatever that may be. And so they decide to avoid the issue by kidnapping the children. Speaking of retribution, it should also be noted that the act of kidnapping the children receives at no point during the film any serious moral questioning, and at the end of the movie, the Martians themselves receive no retribution for doing so. But whatever, speaking from a merely tactical point of view, it does make sense to remove the only evidence that ties you to the crime. However, only moments later the sense ends. The Martians burst into Santa's workshop, are instantly recognized as Martians by one of Santa's helpers, stun everyone, take Santa, and leave. And then obviously later on these elves thaw because it's instantly reported that the Martians stole Santa. We know that the Martians know that their guns would only stun for a while because they tell us, and we also know that the Martians quickly become aware that the humans know they stole Santa because we're told that too. So why kidnap the children to keep the fact you're stealing Santa a secret if you're just going to leave the helpers there? And furthermore, once the cat's out of the bag, why not return the children? And really, there is actually quite a logical answer to that question. That answer being that Santa Claus Conquers the Martians is a terribly written film with bad plot holes, terrible acting, and thoroughly squandered potential.
So there you have it, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. Arguably the film equivalent of a stocking full of coal. As always, I try to imagine who I would suggest this film for, and I suppose if you're like me and you have a morbid curiosity for bad movies, and you love Christmas, give it a crack, but don't expect it to be any good.